So this is a Jubilee segment on liberal teens versus conservative parents as their middle ground kind of debate show where they take disparate groups of people and get them to discuss issues. And usually they're pretty awful at being able to discuss it on both sides. I've seen a couple of clips from this one on TikTok, but I've not actually seen the whole thing. I've been trying to step away from like Hassan and Vosh's coverage of this so far, so hate to add on to the pile, but this did look interesting. So we shall see how it goes.
When you're young, you're not thinking, and everybody has made a bad choice. And because you're stressed out, you go change your gender. Because you want to try something new, once you do it, you can't go back. The more you throw stuff at kids before they develop, that's indoctrination.
When Jubilee created Middle Ground, the intention was to uncover humanity and empathy shared among strangers with opposing beliefs. Whether your political beliefs are on the left or the right, we all exist within our own echo chambers. So for this episode, we partnered with Ground News and created a test that can analyze your news sources and show you their biases. The participants of this episode agreed to take the quiz and share their results. We encourage you to do the same.
Step forward if you agree with the prompt. Cancel culture is a good thing.
Hot, considering I have Lindsay Ellis in the title of my stream, this could be a hot button topic. So I'm prepared to go off. I have plenty of thoughts on that issue.
We have the freedom to say what you want, but everyone else has the freedom to respond and cancel you if you say something that is racist, homophobic, transphobic, etc. Cancel culture is definitely good in the means of like deplatforming people who are spreading very hateful messages.
What is your opinion on Trump being cancelled on Twitter?
When you go onto Twitter, whatever, you check I accept the, guidelines, the community guidelines, I agree to follow them, and he didn't follow them, so Twitter.
Well, he didn't get cancelled on Twitter. Trump got banned from Twitter because he, again, as she rightly says, he violated the terms of service. Now, I do agree with what some people would say, well, how can he get banned when other people who do egregious things also don't get banned? And I think, if they're not following their terms of service, or at least invoking their terms of service in an even-handed manner, I do think that's a bad thing. But, if you sign up to a website and you don't follow the terms of service, tough shit, not much we can do. You tick the box. I don't agree with some of the terms of service that these websites provide, but you're free to go and find alternatives. It's a free market after all.
Has the right to take him off the app.
And for people that might make the counter-argument that Twitter is biased and will only cancel right-wing politicians, that's not true at all. Twitter and other forms of social media have canceled left-wing activists. There is an equal balance on both sides.
I think from the debate I saw between Chud and Robner showed the evidence showed that right-wing figures are both terminated from the platforms more often and also pushed in the algorithms more often as well. So it's kind of a double-bladed sword with regards to that issue. But who says that conservatives are getting deplatformed more because Twitter hates conservatives or they're taking them off the platform? Hey, thank you for the follow, Serendipity. It's difficult to pronounce, but yes, thank you very much for the follow. Whether they're getting deplatformed because just Twitter and Facebook, all these platforms, have this innate hate for conservative people, or maybe conservatives just can't follow the terms of service. I mean, we have the discussion. Obviously, I've talked about plenty of content about just if you sign up to the agreement about what's on the platform, what should or shouldn't be on the platform, just follow it. If you want to speak whatever your mind is, go on Facebook, where they're far more lenient than there are or on Twitter, where they're far more lenient than, say, for example, Twitch after the whole C-word discourse that went on, etc., etc. There's this kind of level to which platforms are going to be able to, within their terms of service, be lenient towards the kind of speech people do and don't engage in, and you just got to find the platform that fits your actual stated views on what you do and don't want to say. For example, if you choose to go on Dylan Burns' panel and start misgendering people, you're going to get kicked off the fucking panel, because that is the agreement that you've gone into by engaging with that particular piece of media.
You brought up canceling him off Twitter. I'm sorry, I disagree. When the Taliban can use our social media, but an ex-president can't, there is something wrong with that.
Did the Taliban violate community guidelines?
It doesn't matter.
Well, the Taliban guy got banned, whatever his fucking name was, Malan Koshtai. He got banned off the platform. He did get his account banned eventually. Maybe they didn't ban him quickly enough, but if he's good at, skirting his way around the TOS, then that's fair enough. But
I think it matters to Twitter what their community guidelines are. That's why they banned Trump, because Trump violated community guidelines. That's what every platform has, whether it be TikTok, YouTube, Instagram.
The Taliban stones people because they're gay.
If they've done that and they've posted videos of stoning gay people, I agree they should be removed, and that is fundamentally wrong.
Except the problem is they're smart enough to not do that.
Well,
Well, then why wasn't
Yeah, exactly. If your ex-president is dumber than the fucking Taliban on what they post on Twitter, maybe you should reconsider what you think about certain ex-presidents, right? Left takes a tier doesn't go far enough, but threats of doxing should be an instant ban. Also, total bans should be there as one maniac following 27 times. Well, that's the issue, right? Because it's a anonymous platform. If you do ban people, they can just come back. I mean, there's plenty of lefty shit posters who are on their 5th, 6th, 7th accounts or whatever because they keep violating their TOS. But at least they understand that. At least they understand. Well, they are the TOS. I'm gonna continue to flout it and just get a new account when I get banned, rather than the conservatives who just cry foul whenever they get deplatformed from Twitter or whatever. But I do agree. Like these threats of doxing don't get caught up, and there's a lot of, if you're in a marginalized community on Twitter, you seem to not get enough protection than you otherwise would do elsewhere. For example, TikTok is really good at clamping down on language against marginalized people, which Twitter is not. But again, there's give and take with what is and isn't allowed on certain platforms, and Twitter is very toxic. And I'm not going to decry anybody who decides to step away from that particular area because I absolutely hate it as well.
Trump's
And the
plans to
president
do
wasn't
that?
smart enough to not do that, I guess.
If I'm an American and I have to vote between this person, I need equal access to both of them to decide what's right. Bro, you could be a Klansman, you could say you hate black people. That's not my job to police your language. I can't expect everybody to love me and think the way I think. All y'all think differently. That's totally dope. But the fact that you want somebody removed because they think differently, that could be you one day.
Do you think freedom of speech is something that still exists in America?
We do have aspects of freedom of speech. Like you can't go into a movie theater and yell fire. So obviously there are limits of freedom of speech.
But they're picking and choosing who they're silencing and who they're letting talk.
If people react negatively to what you say, it goes both ways. You can't just say that, oh, they
100%.
can't. Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
America is becoming less
And also, I hate every time a freedom of speech argument comes up, I just want to absolutely, tear my hair out because people don't really understand. Obviously, I understand that things get more protracted from, the original definition of freedom of speech as it exists in the law, which is that you can't be punished by the state for saying or saying specific things, right? You can't say a certain thing and then have the state then impede upon you because of that or, indict you. For example, I think a really good case on the state going too far with regards to free speech is we look at Count Dankula, who got actual sentenced to a crime for doing the Nazi pug salute, right? Which is absolutely fucking disgraceful. That should never have happened. Because that's the state getting involved. A private entity saying that we don't want you in our particular forum because we think that you denigrate, the function of that forum. That's not the same thing as, the general state clamping down on what you do, on what you say, etc., etc. These are in no way linked, and you don't have a fundamental right to be able to go and say whatever you want on someone else's platform. It's if you walk into someone's house and just start screaming the N-word, they're gonna kick you out. It's not obvious. And if you want to have a forum for a certain kind of discussion, rules are going to have to be put in place to ensure the functionality of said forum. So, for example, there's a ContraPoints video that's been deleted ages ago now because it's pre-transition. Which makes a hilarious point that you can't go on 4chan and post My Little Pony because it's supposed to be a forum for shitposting. But if all you're seeing is fucking reams and reams of My Little Pony images, you're gonna get pissed off, and that impacts the functionality of the forum. And there's supposed to be some 4chan supposed to be some kind of free speech platform, whatever. Especially the random board. They're getting so frustrated by its functionality being reduced by people just endlessly posting My Little Pony shit. Of course, that is going to end up meaning that there's going to be some level of moderation with regards to what they will and won't put on the actual board itself, right? It's not rocket science.
less and less safe.
No worries, thank you, Seb. It's good to have you on stream.
I'll leave this to you guys.
So I have a lot of friends that have been in the military for the last 20 years because they refused to get vaccinated. They told me that they would be dishonorably discharged or kicked out of the military. I just believe we're losing a lot of good servicemen with the current situation that we're in right now.
A lot of police officers are down. Crime is up all over. When police aren't there, we're murdering each other at a really high rate. Police are in those neighborhoods because the homicide rate is high. Y'all can run around talking about police all you want, but I challenge any of these liberal kids to spend 2 weeks in the environment I grew up in, and I promise your perspective will change.
The one advantage we have about being older, we've been through a threat or two. And our enemies, like China, the Communist Party in China, they're laughing at us. Russia's like, we don't need to do much. They're gonna screw it up on their own. We need to get the help of our younger people that haven't been through a threat
Thank
before.
you for the raid, Chud Logic. Welcome, raiders. How are we all doing? We have got some funny rightoid content that we're going to be laughing at. Hope we're all doing well. I've just come out of the Chud stream myself. I'm sure you've seen me in chat. And it is good to have you here. if you would like to drop a follow at some point, please feel free to do so. I'm not going to force you or anything. But let's go. This is Jubilee debate. It's liberal teens versus conservative parents. They're currently discussing if America is becoming less safe, and of course, their first go-to was the People's Republic of China.
Part of what's going on is not good. My name is Mike, I'm 59 years old, and I'm a conservative parent. You know, growing up there in the 1980s, you know, that was a huge influence on me, and it formed my views, and the people that I was around is the reason why I'm a conservative parent.
So at least a conservative is actually going to be able to admit that their views are shaped by the situations that they're put in, rather than the other way around. It's odd to see a conservative be happy to admit that views are, shaped by societal forces rather than being something intrinsic that you have amongst yourself, which is a more lefty take that you see. Did Hassan cover it for 2 hours? Bloody hell. Happy New Year to everybody else as well.
I think America should be more middle of the road and not be necessarily more liberal. And if anything, it should be a hint more on the conservative side. Because we're going to watch our freedoms get extinguished or encroached if we don't guard those freedoms and make sure that all of our children have a chance to succeed.
Well, it's interesting, it doesn't say which freedoms in specific, right? Whereas obviously if you put something more towards the conservative side, would you by any chance lose, I don't know, the freedom to abortion, the freedom to gay marriage, the freedom to etc., right? I mean, there's always going to be this push and pull between what people agree societally are freedoms that shouldn't be enshrined within law or whatever. And if he thinks that things move more conservative, then other people are going to lose some of their freedoms as well.
Can they disagree a step forward?
I actually wished I came up here for the agreeing section because I think I interpreted the definition of safety the same way that you guys did, but after hearing your guys' conversation, I started thinking about how...
I mean, you're right, non-white Fourth Amendment freedom that gets unreasonable searches. But that's the problem, is that a lot of conservatives feel like what freedom they should have. I know this is kind of like begging the question, sort of, poisoning the well. But a lot of conservatives do feel like the freedom they should be entitled to is the freedom to live in a neighborhood unsullied by the poors and unsullied by people who have come out of a different area of society, some kind of particular cultural consensus they should have in their own particular neighborhood, which is again that is enshrined into a lot of laws with regards to fixed zoning on areas, and you see in the conservative rhetoric coming up to the elections as well and things like that, talking about the left are threatening the suburbs. I mean, obviously damn fucking right we're threatening the suburbs with excellent urban planning measures, but that's what they fear, and that's what threatens them.
Our American people aren't safe in the face of imminent climate disasters that are coming our way, and how we don't have the infrastructure to deal with that.
I actually very much agree with that, because I think we need to define what we mean by we're less safe now. Do we mean there's more homicides after COVID, or what do we mean?
I would say before.
I mean, as we're looking at crime rates certainly lower now than it was in the early 90s. I don't know how useful this is as a metric, but there's the prelude to the first book of Freakonomics. Talks about how 18 years after Roe versus Wade was passed, you saw a dramatic drop in abortion rates because the people who are going to be born into families of poverty with a higher criminality rate ended up being aborted rather than existing, which they posit is one of the reasons why there was a drop in crime rate in the 90s, which I find quite interesting.
We got rid of half our military, half our police force. Slavery was legal. The Holocaust was legal. So we can look at all of these mass atrocities and say we're doing what's right. Everybody who was a part of the Holocaust government, they were doing what Hitler said. They were doing what was right. So everybody losing their job for not getting vaxxed, and all the vax people, you got who can we control? Everybody who get the shot, that's who's gonna do what we say. The enemies are coming, and we don't care about that because we want to care about what color we should wear and pride and critical race theory. It's no one else cares about that but us in America. That's our problem.
So you think that
the only country in the world that cares about LGBT or racial rights issues is just the United States? It's always fucking conservatives who just have this incredibly blinkered view of international politics. I'm sure there are plenty of lefties who don't really engage with that in the same way either. But so conservatives just do not want to leave, especially American conservatives do not want to leave their intra-country bubble and have a look at the way things work in other countries. They're just completely ignorant to it. Hate crime rate up in 2015, we'd see a crime rate increase down in 2018, simply due to the number of young men with nothing to do increasing. Well, that's true. Neoliberal atomization is certainly leading to higher crime rates at the moment. You look in the UK, for example, we saw a dramatic decrease in crime just in the start of New Labour, when Sure Start centres were increased and things like that. And then as, the economic recession hit, that caused more crime rates. Then once the Conservatives used that to win an election, as part, or at least go into coalition in 2010, and Sure Start centres were closed down, and people who came from poor backgrounds didn't really have the resources to be able to obviously escape poverty, because the social the social mobility index had also decreased, but also all of these kind of things that were there to build community between people, especially people within poorer areas, these were all stripped and removed as council budgets got cut by the Conservatives. So crime rate did increase over time during the Conservative administrations. Obviously it's only going to go up even more during COVID.
Talking about sexual orientation and all that kind of stuff takes away from the safety of our country.
Who you sleep with has no merit in the real world. What does it matter?
Okay, let's just broaden the scope. With the coronavirus pandemic, why did it take weeks for us as a country to mobilize together to fight the public health crisis that was already affecting the nation?
It was a scam to get Donald Trump out of office. It's all fake. It's my opinion.
I agree with you.
I don't think that we could create, or the Democrats could create some international plan, getting all of these scientific communities outside of just the US. And even
What? The whole COVID was created by the Democrats to make Trump look bad. First of all, obviously, Parker here is absolutely correct in saying that obviously that's complete nonsense. Why would the entire world all shut down just because of the Democratic Party? Obviously, just shows this immoral brain kind of internal brain poison these guys have, these conservative people have. But just secondly of all, if they were trying to do it to make Trump look bad, why would they have continued with it after Joe Biden got elected? That just makes no fucking sense. What the fuck?
even international governments on their side for something that they're just trying to get Trump out of office.
I mean, that's true. Like, Jubilee does include people who come from people who already have kind of platforms. So this Parker guy, he's big on TikTok and he's got like 40k followers. Forsh was speaking to him the other day. I caught a bit of the conversation. Of course, we're bullying conservatives. What do you think this channel's for? Absolutely, absolutely, exactly. Yeah, and I think you're right, crowdsourcing. This particular platform that they use heightens people with already, skewed voices on these particular issues because they're already activists, right? So they are, as activists, are already incentivized by these platforms to hold extreme views, as these are going to be the things that are going to engender creating a larger audience, because conflict is what drives engagement, as we were speaking on stream before. China are so clever, they invented a virus that only affects countries run by incompetent fuckwits. True. Although, to be fair, there were plenty of countries in Europe and things like that who just failed because they weren't prepared, because they didn't know what was going on. You look at what happened in Italy. Like, the people were sharing houses with, the corpses of their dead relatives because they were just so overwhelmed in, like, Lombardy. I think it was the Lombardy region in Italy, because they didn't know what was going on. And obviously, the PRC is pretty secretive, with what does and doesn't go on in their within their shores. So it's no wonder that some countries got hit particularly hard with it, especially in high density areas in Europe, which are going to be likely to be affected highly by a contagious virus. I'm guessing this view is by people who've never been anywhere. They think America is the world. When it's not been to America, it's far less nice than Cuba, Lesbos, and Denmark. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's true, but still the countries who took mitigating factors to be able to deal with it were the ones who performed better. I mean, it's no surprise that countries who instigated lockdowns saw lower curves or lower level of infections, etc., which it's difficult for people to deal with, unfortunately. I appreciate the comment, Goblinist. That's much appreciated. I mean, but it is right, and generally the countries that are higher density, high population density in Europe and in North America, the people who are likely to be hit by it. Although I feel like Canada did pretty well because of the the lockdown policies they engaged in, and it's just frustrating that in the UK we locked down too late, because the actual furlough plan that was put in place was reasonably good. Obviously, I'm not going to comment on test and trace, that was bad. But like the furlough plan that was put in place in the UK was much better than anything that was done in the US. Just give people money and then just not bother even looking at what the economy was. Whereas in the UK, when we locked down, everywhere was closed. Everyone got paid, was it 80% of their wage if they couldn't go to work? People were then made to work from home. I worked from home the entirety of the pandemic, so I work in a call center. Whereas this was a policy that did work and did help to reduce infections. Obviously, we then unlocked too early in Christmas, just coming up to Christmas 2020, and that caused a huge spike in infections when you had Eat Out to help out, etc. Yeah, like New Zealand, I definitely would praise New Zealand's approach to the to their cover to their handling of the pandemic for sure, for sure. Whereas if the UK had locked down earlier, they'd not done Eat Out to help out or whatever, and unlocked too early in September 2020. I think we would have been I think we would have had a much better time than we actually did. Obviously, there was the care home scandal as well, which happened in the UK and the US. Obviously, was it Chris Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo? I forget which one it is. Um, their faces are far too similar for me. And what can I say? I'm just racist against Italians. But all the things people with COVID being put into care homes was just absolutely horrendous policy.
I feel like that's heavily ridiculous.
Trump was the thorn that nobody saw coming, and they had to find a way to get him out of there. If there's no mail-in voting, 100%
Trump was no thought. I'm like, I hate this idea that somehow Trump was just there attacking the deep state, attacking like the establishment, when he was the guy who just put a bunch of fucking executive bankers into extreme positions of power. People who already had loads of money and wealth and influence were all the people he surrounded himself with. He even bragged at his rallies that he could just like say the word and get a bunch of campaign contributions over what he would otherwise have been allowed to by electoral law, because he had so many friends in high places. This guy, even if he was just like some kind of rogue billionaire who didn't have any other friends, he's still rich as fucking Croesus, right? Yet somehow he's being billed as an anti-establishment character just because he triggers the libs. Basically, this is their only policy. These guys' only ideology is libs bad, which true, libs are bad, but not the way they think they are.
the president right now, 100%.
Yeah, because overwhelmingly mail-in ballots were to Biden. That's obvious. Like,
Exactly.
That's not because mail-in ballots are fraudulent, because mail-in ballots are actually not fraudulent at all. That this election was the safest election in recorded history.
There's a lot of videos, so you see people with fake ballots, so that's here and there. I'm not.
That's just hearsay from random people on TikTok.
Yeah, like it's funny how none of the affidavits actually came up as showing any evidence of electoral fraud through vote by mail. And then most of the electoral fraud that I'd actually seen was instances of Republican voters, but that's by the by. Electoral fraud really doesn't happen very often at all, especially not in places with very kind of rigid democracies like the UK and the US, etc. Especially in the UK, when you look at, we've been able to postal vote since time immemorial, right? A huge number of people postal vote in the UK, and it's never been an issue.
Are we really gonna take that as empirical evidence?
It's a personal opinion.
My name is Parker, I'm 19, and I'm a liberal. My sisters and I have become a lot more liberal, a lot more left-leaning over time, while my parents have stayed a bit conservative. Before, when I was a conservative, I kind of just went off a lot of the indoctrination and propaganda that was spread to me when I was a kid. I grew up on the fact that, we shouldn't have increased taxes because taxes are just negatively affecting us. Personal responsibility isn't what a lot of the decisions people make in society is based on. It's mainly based upon their environments, how they're socialized by their parents, people around them, things like that.
Based.
My news source is more reliable than the other side's.
News source.
When I look at conservative news, I see a lot of conspiracies that I don't necessarily agree with. And so if everything comes from opinion and just...
That's such a bad way of putting it. They discuss conspiracies that I don't agree with. Then people can come back to you and say, well, just because you don't agree with it, then you say it's wrong. Saying they peddle conspiracy theories that have no basis in empirical fact and haven't been shown with any kind of rationale behind it, right? That would be a much better way of putting it, rather than leaving yourself open to be going, it's just my opinion, etc., etc.
People developing their own ideas, it just doesn't seem reliable to me.
I feel like the only way we can get unbiased news is in order for news media organizations to stop prioritizing having really vivid headlines that might not necessarily be 100% accurate.
I think that starts with putting people over profit. They want the biggest story or whatever, and they don't want to actually give the news that would be beneficial to our everyday average Americans. And I think that if we put a lot more focus on putting people first instead of the big news or the big story, we can change that aspect of society.
I agree with you 100%.
And even if you took like a kind of liberal perspective and just say like, okay, well, we'll look at some kind of independent media analyzer like Ad Fontes or NewsGuard or whatever, have a look at which kind of news organizations they say are in the center or left skewed or right skewed, etc., etc. Then even if you put this to a bunch of conservatives, because I have done in many occasions previously, you'll say, well, according to Ad Fontes and NewsGuard, this piece is a centrist organization who usually reports things based on fact rather than a kind of opinion. They'll still say, well, because it doesn't conform to my ideological worldview, it must be biased towards the left. Despite the fact, I feel like most left-leaning people that I know are happy to understand the biases of the things that they watch and interact with, but are also happy to understand when something is fact-based or not, whereas conservatives will just take anything that disagrees with their intrinsic worldview as somehow being biased against them. Maybe that's just my kind of confirmation bias from, interacting with infuriating conservatives on the Bird app too often, but it's difficult to, quantify that empirically, etc., etc. But as a Marxoid, the take is obviously, well, all of these, media organizations are driven by one sole purpose, and that is generating shareholder profits, right? So they're always going to intrinsically, not through any active notion, but through, incentive structures, peddle the lines of capitalism as it is, right? So even something that's liberal leaning with regards to social issues, for example, which I'm sure most people in my chat are also are, they're still going to toe the line of capitalism at the end of the day because they have to rely on, they have to rely on being able to generate profit as their main fiduciary responsibility, right? You see this with places like The Guardian, even like the quote-unquote left-leaning sources with regards to news networks. Even The Guardian is very, very anti-socialism and is very kind of pro-capitalism, unless you look at someone like fringe or journalist like Aditya Chakraborty, etc., etc. Whereas when you want to actually have a look at proper leftist organizations who deal with news media, they're all independent, and rather than PLCs, etc.
100%. Like I say,
Hey,
the civil
thank you
rights
for following,
movement is the civil rights
Crowdsource. Wow,
entertainment
look at the
industry
gifted
because it's so
subs.
profitable. Put a
Amazing.
police shooting on
Thank you so
TV,
much,
it's breaking
Crowdsource.
news, every headline is on every social media. You're selling shirts, you're selling signs. That's so much more profitable than showing me and you shaking hands.
Welcome
The
to
news
the
media is
Justice
literally
Street.
capitalizing off the emotions of society. No matter how you feel about it, handle it in your privacy of your house. Why? Because if you can do it on camera, somebody's gonna make $1 off of it, and that's not fair to you.
Young people today are too sensitive.
So I think it's a good thing that young people are sensitive. I think today they can be more sensitive than what they probably could have been 30 or 40 years ago. The growing up was the Berlin crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, we had the threat of annihilation, staring at us several times. And a lot of times I go, thank God John Kennedy handled it.
The country has been spoiled for so long. They're trying to make it so a man can't be a man. And if you don't let men be men, then things start crumbling, society crumbles.
Oh, please, please, I'm desperate for someone to just say, what do you mean by be a man? And then watch him just kind of crumble as he can't properly describe his own kind of gender expectations. Rather, like, no one's saying men can't be men. Just don't be a dickhead. I know, right? This just they can't even. The thing is, if you just challenge them on it, if you just challenge, they can't even define it themselves, and they just think, well, they've just been, again, as we've always said, people are always going to be products of their environments, and they've been, especially if you've grown up from like kind of that generation, they have an understanding of a way in which they have been taught to act by society, and it's partly, being indoctrinated into this mindset, but partly a fear of people who haven't been. For example, I spent a lot of time existing as a kind of gender non-conforming man. I've never been particularly masculine or whatever. I've always been feminine, even when I had a male gender identity, right? So what happens with a lot of people were scared and were threatened by my very existence of just being outside of this kind of manosphere masculine kind of indoctrination that they'd always been through. That they felt threatened by the fact that I just didn't feel the need to conform to it. Again, maybe I'm projecting here, maybe I'm over analyzing this particular situation, but I tend to feel this happens a lot of the time. I don't know how everyone else in chat feels. Again, I'm not going to try and pretend to be some kind of authority on this, but just from my own personal experience, when say, well, yeah, it's fine. I wear what I want. I act how I want. I don't subscribe to any particular kind of masculine characteristics that they all do. And they. I hate to brag, I hate to boast, but they felt threatened by the fact that I was successful relationship-wise as well. When they didn't, then they thought they'd kind of been taught for a very long time that the way to get women is you have to be, this kind of hyper-masculine stereotype. You have to conform to these kind of patterns of attraction, these kind of patterns of behavior that you engage in with women. And because I didn't engage with that, their worldview became threatened in the same way that if a vegan tells somebody that they're vegan in a non-threatening way, just in a kind of general conversational way, a lot of carnivorous people, or omnivorous people, I guess, rather, or non-vegans, will get threatened by that because they feel like it's some kind of natural impugning of their own choices, rather than, I'm pretty sure most vegans aren't the kind of preachy types who only talk about it to be able to impugn other people's lifestyle or whatever. Most vegans should understand it's a personal choice that they engage in, especially under capitalism, etc., rather than trying to make a moral judgment on people who don't also engage in that, right? People will have, I think most sensible vegans will understand that everyone has a different moral compass, different moral axioms that they adhere to, and expecting everyone to understand exactly where vegans are coming from is like it's pissing into the wind, really. No, the youth men can't be men anymore. Boys don't allowed to be rough and tumble. At least be highly discouraged. At least that's what John is correct about. I disagree. Like, I think boys are happy to like rough and tumble, etc. when they're growing up, but the I think that there's been a lot of times when people have been permissible. They've been very permissive of kind of an ingrained culture of kind of implicit misogyny, not explicit misogyny, but like the kind of implicit misogyny of what the kind of behavior boys engage in, especially growing up and especially at school, which kind of ties into a whole kind of manosphere kind of view of the world. I mean, again, maybe it's different in the United States or whatever, but I don't really see it from where I am. Especially when I have friends who are teachers and who say they don't see it. And in general, I've been incredibly encouraged by a lot of the boys that I've seen growing up in the latest generation seem to be a lot more kind of emotionally intelligent than their predecessors. I mean, fair enough. I mean, I've not seen that be as discouraged, at least not explicitly. Okay, fair enough. Maybe I'm just wrong. Maybe I'm just too busy in my queer echo chamber, which I'm absolutely happy to admit to, but I don't really engage with a lot of the wider society with regard to these.
Crumbles, families crumble, and broken homes start happening.
And kids need their fathers. So 36% of kids don't have a father. So every boy is, well, my mom is mad at me, my dad don't love me, my dad don't care about me. Maybe I should be gay, maybe I should be trans, I don't know who I am. And your father
Source. Citation, please, on that claim.
puts confidence in you. No disrespect to anybody, but the younger generation of men are soft. And if we had to go to war, they're not protecting America. There's no better place to be as a black individual or whatever you are in America. Go to the Middle East right now and say you gay or you trans and see how they treat you.
Right, okay, and also, I mean, I probably don't have to make this point, but just because something is bad somewhere else doesn't mean that everywhere else is also fine.
Johnny, I'm 32 years old, and I am a conservative parent. My grandfather was a no-excuse individual. He grew up in the Jim Crow South, but he worked hard. The house that he bought is still in our family today. He had a garden in his backyard. If you step past a certain line, he got on you. So watch the men.
That's the problem, is so many conservatives just of this opinion that people are outside of the norm because something's happened to them to skew them away from normality rather than just accepting kind of the natural variation, within societal preferences.
Before me, who really could have been lynched for stepping out of line, who really could have went through a hardship for not doing what society said.
I would like to, I have an excellent relationship with my father. Like, if you're watching, Dad, hi, love you.
And the worst thing that can happen to me is I get a mean tweet or a dislike. So I got to fully
I still turned out the fucking polyamorous communist transsexual.
Embrace who I am, and I know I can create anything with my 2 hands and feet.
I'm Hannah, I'm 17, and I'm a liberal. I really want equality
Obviously, that's like a simple anecdote, Andy, but don't care.
for all, and the liberal policies that have been passed side more with my values of equality for those who are on the LGBTQ, those who are on the gender spectrum. Something about conservative parents that I don't like is whenever I come across them, they seem to be very rooted in their ways and not willing to listen to someone who's a teenager like me. They think more like, oh, because I'm older, I have more knowledge, which is not necessarily always the case.
Can we have the disagreeer step forward?
Yeah, like, I mean, who would especially want to invade America when they spend fucking $780 billion a year on fucking military spending? It'd be nonsense. I mean, it's understandable. I mean, I think people tend to move away from factual news sources more as they get older because you become less trusting. Obviously, especially if you just come out of school, especially like higher education, you kind of learn this, kind of a critical analysis of text in the way that you just kind of forget as you get older, as you come out of that kind of educational setting. Hey, thanks for the follow, Twitch Tweaker 1.
This idea that because men...
My daughter got ideas from infant school gender norms, but 5-year-old who's homeschooled, loves classes, and her transformers, sometimes wants to wear a cherry dress. Well, your son is based. I would like to put that, and thank you very much for the follow, Plage Rage. Welcome to the No Justice stream.
...are being raised by women, that they're weaker, is, in my opinion, completely false. Our generation, it's not more sensitive, we're more aware of all these things. Being transgender and gay is not something that should be ashamed of or make you...
I also find this idea that in this discussion that they're having here, they kind of, the liberal people here, or the kind of the left-leaning ones, whatever, 'cause I know Parker's a leftist rather than a liberal. I think they are taking an incorrect position here, in that they're trying to say that young people aren't too sensitive, which is kind of taking the implicit idea that being sensitive is bad, or we shouldn't be more sensitive. Well, I think what they should really be saying is saying, yeah, no, we are more sensitive, and that's a good thing. That's based. Like, we are, we at least have a level of empathy that has been kind of, taken, just kind of been forced out of people due to a lot of cultural conditioning and a post-neoliberal consensus, etc. That's true. Although I will say again, this is just anecdotal, so don't take this as read. My friend Ed, who was a a physics teacher for 3 years or whatever, he was head of physics. He'd always have this kind of cultural conversation with kids. And he was like, "Well, how do you find out if something's true or not?" And they say, "Well, you Google it, right? And whatever Google says is correct." So they there needs to be some level of more thinking about kind of critical analysis available. And I can't help thinking a lot of the time, a lot of young people are just they kind of luck into a factual news source because everything is more liberal and left leaning in their kind of circles, which tends towards more factual reporting. I don't know whether they actually critically engage with sources. I'd have to see a study about that. I couldn't make any kind of proper comment on it. Oh my god, based Stalin, absolutely. Soviet Alaska, let's go!
Feel less in today's society. That is why women are fighting for equality, because this idea that because they only have a mom, they're weaker, or because they're more sensitive, that's, in my opinion, completely false.
And I would say in the environment that I grew up in, the teen pregnancies come from girls without fathers. The homicides come from people without fathers. Every girl that I know, if they're
Well, the teen pregnancies come from societies with that proper comprehensive fucking sex education. All of the data says this. You just look at European countries who take, pragmatic approaches to sex education, you see the teen pregnancy rate is way lower, regardless of fatherlessness or not. But obviously, if you're going to become I think he's putting the chicken before the egg here. I think it's far more reasonable to say that, young parents they're more likely to be single, rather than saying, single people are more likely to be young parents, right? Or the young, or yeah. I think he's putting the cart before the horse here. It also does come from poverty as well. You're absolutely right, crowdsource. But I mean, I think people take too much of an idea that obviously people are more likely to be men who are put into prison because not only are they more likely to commit crime, but they're also more likely to be sentenced more harshly as well within the criminal justice system. And also, it does come from poverty and shit. Welfare systems, absolutely. Crime and poverty are intrinsically linked. That's why crime rates are low in social democratic countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, etc., etc. Absolutely, 100%. But people say, well, if all these dads are in prison and all of their children grow up with single mothers are then becoming engaging in more criminality, then this is a problem with not having a father figure in the home or whatever. They make this inference, which I don't think is particularly correct. When first of all, if you're a single parent, you're just more likely to be poor, right? You don't have the dual income that you really need to have a proper household in 2021. So you're more likely going to grow up into a household with more poverty. But also, if someone's always working all the time, they don't have the time to have that emotional connection that you otherwise would have if you had two parents with which to be able to do that. I don't think that's necessarily specific to having a father figure. I think that's specific to single parenthood. Whereas you could have two gay dads or two gay mums or two people of of non-binary gender identities in a relationship with children would turn out just as well as straight parents, and the data does show this. It's not a fatherlessness issue; it's a single parent issue.
Girl with a daddy, they get married before they have a kid.
Why do they not have fathers?
If you want me to be real, because a lot of women make bad choices on the men they procreate with. If you make a bad choice, that's your responsibility. Every bad thing that
I hate this individuality bullshit. Oh, it's so incorrect. It's just so wrong.
I did in my life, it was when my daddy was in jail. When my dad was out and I had my dad's reassurance, I was a better person.
I had one daughter that had to move across the country to get rid of a toxic.
Like, say women are choosing bad men to be sexual partners. Well, first of all, like, half the time you don't know about these people when like any kind of poor level to which they would be at a parent, based on the amount of sexual intercourse you engage with them in the first place. And sometimes the threat of parenthood changes people. regardless of gender identity, etc., etc. Right? Obviously, absolutely right, crowdsource, typical conservative mentality that you can't blame any kind of systemic measures, just individual choice, and we'll just forget any kind of wider structural things that are going on in these particular instances. But maybe we have a society that doesn't treat men to be caregivers, to be child rearers, right? And that is a cultural predilection that we have, which is again why you see such a massive disparity in kind of in the way in which people are given child custody. Is because we just, as a society, we don't see men as being able to be child rearers, and that's bad. That's really bad. And obviously this is a feminist issue, right? But it's bad that we think that men can't be good parents or can't be naturally good parents, whatever. And I think maybe, again, this is just my opinion. I'm not trying to claim any kind of empirical source for this. But I think in general, anyone who does have a child, the natural state of being with regards to that child is to want to be nurturing towards it, to want to take care of it. I think that it's a societal influence that has pushed fathers away from being a caregiver and being a child rearer, etc., etc., and why they become, why they run away from parenthood. Especially considering how expensive it is, how challenging it is when you can't have single parent households, and you can't have dual parent households, where one person works and one person takes care of the kids anymore, because you just can't bloody afford it. With rents being so high, with the cost of living being so high, with inflation continuing to go up, both in the US and in Europe, it's a supply chain issue. It's not like a policy issue, in specific. And I'm glad that interest rates have been raised to accommodate for that. But you just can't. If you're like a regular working class family, you want to have kids, you both have to work. You have to, otherwise you cannot afford to raise children. And people don't think about this. People don't think about this. I mean, I don't have children myself. How can I afford to have children on my single income, even though my mortgage is cheaper than what my rent otherwise would be? There was no way I could afford it. Yeah, sex ed was shit and education consent was non-existent. I mean, not surprised.
Relationship
Hey, thank you
with
for
somebody that was
subscription.
harming them.
Much appreciated, Wake and Jake. Welcome to the No Justice stream.
Why does the woman have to move across the country because the man is being toxic? Why can't the man be taught, don't be toxic?
Oh, I agree.
Women nowadays have to deal with those kinds of relationships. The mother knows better, I would say, than the father about that.
We're not more sensitive, there's just more opportunities for us to be sensitive. You can say like 15, 20 years ago, there weren't videos of black men being shot by police all over the internet. Now that that's there, people are more inclined to feel a certain way or take a stance on that topic.
Well, that's a good point, in that because of 24-hour rolling news, we have more interaction with society as it exists, and when we have more interaction with people whose backgrounds and circumstances differ from ours, we become more empathetic. I think that's a good thing.
Do you think it would be more beneficial to show police also interacting with white guys? Because more white guys get killed than black guys by cops.
If you look at the amount of white people and the amount of black people, there are going to be more white people killed because there are more white people in America.
Yeah, just look at it per capita, and obviously it's worse for black people.
The percentage of black people that are being killed is higher than the percentage of white people.
Well, just because you're pulled over doesn't mean you have to resist. I mean, they don't just kill you when they pull you over. It's all about based on how you perform as an individual. I've been pulled over and never had a bad interaction in my life. When I was rude,
It's never happened to me. What's survivorship bias? I don't know. I've never heard of such a thing as survivorship bias before.
I got snatched out the car. Everything is a personal choice, and you can't take accountability for your life, and you will forever be a slave.
I mean, the sad part is it's 100% true. It's absolutely 100% true that you should take full accountability for everything you engage in life, right? You should want to be the best that you can be. You should want to be able to, maximize your own opportunities through whatever systems you've been put in, right? To say otherwise would be completely fucking stupid. Absolutely, 100% agree with that. But what that shouldn't be is an argument for not looking at things systemically. Which is what, oh god, there was a panel of fucking Karlin Borisenko of all people, which just of the opinion that every single leftist believes that all individuals just lie down and rot because they have no agency in face of a system that oppresses them. And I'm like, well, no, you can fundamentally agree that both the systems need to change to make things more equal with regards to opportunity, and that also individuals should take their own personal drive to be able to make their life as good as they can do with the lot that they've been given, whilst also trying to engender systemic change at the same time. These are not contradictory positions to hold.
It's not true. There are definitely issues on the side of policing. Black communities, majority POC communities are over-policed. There's larger patrols in black communities. There are police work longer hours in majority black communities. So there's an issue from the policing side as well.
I mean, Why do you think the police go there? Because the crime rates are higher. Why do you think the crime rate is higher? Generational wealth, poverty. Simple. Very, very simple.
Politics has damaged my relationship with a loved one.
I'm sure you could relate to this as well, but in the Asian community, there's a lot of anti-blackness. So with the advent of the Black Lives Matter movement this past year, having conversations with my parents was really difficult, especially around the nuances of racial justice.
I'm so glad both my parents are sock dems. Oh god, it makes like when the only conversation about politics that you have is about whether Keir Starmer is like a cop or not. It makes things so much easier than if you had like if I had like Tory parents. Like my whole family is very left leaning, so I've pretty good with that. Like my extended family aren't quite as left leaning, but I think they're kind of coming round. Yeah, because my dad actually ran to be an SDP councillor during the Thatcher year. He's not quite JLP, but he's close. Like he's still regurgitating all the same manufactured talking points.
And sort of like what the movement was fighting for and how to articulate that in like the very closed mindset that my parents had.
A lot of my family voted for Trump in the past election, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't like to say this, but it made me view their morals a little bit differently, and they're willing to adapt and change was so different, and I was just like shocked because I wanted to understand their side and really talk about it, and I was met with, you're wrong, and we don't want to talk about it, and that kind of really damaged just kind of the way I looked at them.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
And there's really good, there's a great Tom Nicholas video talking about how people view politics and how some people view politics as this separate thing where you talk about political parties, you talk about elections, you talk about candidacies, etc., and you talk about policy. And this is the politics sphere. And then there's this other cultural sphere, which, you know, if you link the two, then you're causing a ruckus, you're making things worse, whatever. Whereas there's another school of thought that says, well, even the cultural sphere is also inherently political as well. That's why you get this clash where people will say, stop bringing politics into this discussion, because especially if you're from a marginalized identity, like your existence is always political, right? Like when people talk like identity politics, it kind of, I understand where they're coming from a lot of the time, but it just drives me around the bend when people say, well, this is just identity politics. I'm like, well, no, maybe for you. For me, it's survival politics, right? Like what happens to the Gender Recognition Act, that affects me directly. Like that's, and to be able to survive in this world, I need to be able to have effects over what policy gets passed, etc. But when people talk about, well, don't make things political, I was like, well, no, the politics that you espouse says something about your own moral predilections, right? When you're electing a politician, when you're choosing a political point of view, that is, you know, exposes you in a kind of inherent moral characteristics that your moral axioms that you kind of subscribe to, right? And so when you say, well, we should just vote for who we vote for and then leave that be, and I'm like, well, no. Like, if you vote for a certain policy or you support a certain person or you support a certain worldview, then that says something about your kind of moral predilections. And, you know, people are fine to want to say, well, no, if you have this moral compass, either I'm going to challenge you on that or I'm not going to want to be associated with you because I think this diverges too much from what I would want to see in my friend group or in my relationship group, etc.
And I also think that it just made me less willing to expend the energy to have political or just like any like hard conversations with my parents or anyone else in my family. My name is Brithwick, I'm 18 years old and I'm a liberal. I grew up in a low-income immigrant household, and I think the systems that are in place right now aren't sufficient enough to support people, Americans like myself or my family. Because my parents were immigrants, I think they were liberal on issues like immigration and things that directly affected them. I'd like to ask to the conservative parents why they don't necessarily listen or adopt their own beliefs, whether political.
I mean, that's true. I mean, obviously the Democratic Party is very kind of big tent, which is frustrating because I feel like the Republican Party is just so kind of central in its own narratives that it tries to push. Whereas obviously the fragmented nature of kind of the liberal centrist wing of, you know, the Democratic Party makes it difficult to be able to find a coherent narrative. Like, I'm glad that, you know, I guess amongst like even liberal, like centrist liberal voters in the United States now, labor issues have become kind of a big focus. I think Joe Biden is one of the more like pro-labor presidents that we've had in a long time, maybe not since Eisenhower. Because obviously, you know, even obviously I'm a Marxist, I'm a communist, right? You have to disengage from the bourgeois pantomime that is electoral politics. But you still have to engage with it on a pragmatic level. Like, if you believe that it's just this bourgeois pantomime where you can't make any kind of real proper systemic change, then you should detach yourself emotionally, engage with it in like cold-hearted, pragmatic utilitarianism. Just say, well, this party does these things I like, I'm going to vote for them. So, for example, if you believe, as I do, that the best way for change is through organizing, through direct action, through kind of using a platform to be able to radicalize people, right? Then what you want, the people you want to have in power, if you believe, like I do, that you can't really change things on a systemic level through policy that's been passed down through the electoral means, you should at least try and elect people that make your organizing easier. So, for example, if you want to be a union organizer in the United States, which is a really good place for left-wing politics to thrive, you need to have someone who is in power who's going to appoint someone who's going to be pro-union to the head of the National Labor Relations Board. Otherwise, your structure is just going to get broken every time. And people, and like for example, the rulings that were done where people like Amazon, people like Tesla were engaging in union busting. These things are not going to go in your favor unless you have a pro-union president, right? Like that's when you look at like the divide in politics, you just got to talk about the issues that matter to your organizing, your level of organizing. Like, for example, in the UK, obviously I disagree with all of Keir Starmer's like policy prescriptions, but the fact that the Labour Party is entirely union funded, they have to answer to the whims of the unions at the end of the day. So if you want to organise through unions in the UK, just elect Labour. Like, simple as that. Then you won't get any anti-union policy passed because they literally can't do it, otherwise they lose all their funding. And then you can push from the outside using that platform. Like in the United States, and in the UK, loads of anti-union legislation has been passed by conservative administrations, and that's what we have to stop. That's what we really have to stop.
Or social based on the conversations they have with their children and why they're so set in their ways.
I read a lot of the tragic stories where family members don't talk to each other anymore. Personally, I think that's sad. Do all my family members vote the same? No. Do we have a pretty good idea of how family members may have voted? Yeah. But we went more of agree to disagree. I'm not going to not buy you a present for Christmas because, you decided to vote for somebody that I don't like. Give me a break. Families are special. And we've got too many people, as you've talked about, that don't have them.
When I took this prompt, I kind of took it more of like my view of the person changed differently because, not because of the way they voted, but because some of their values to me were, like you said, moral values, and that shows kind of part of their characters.
Would you say that morality is subjective to each individual person, though? Or would you say morals are the same across the board?
The basic is human.
Also, it does depend on your constituency as well there, Sam. Like, if you're in a red-blue swing constituency, just vote Labour. Just hold your nose, put the X in, go back, do organising, forget about whatever you've done electorally, right? But if you're in a safe seat, like I've been in safe red seats basically my whole life. Apart from now, actually, I'm now living in a swing seat. Since I bought my house, I'm now in a swing seat. Now I vote Labour, but I've always been voting Green, just because I want to be able to use that as a position to want to move Labour towards more green policies to stop them from losing swing seats to a split vote with Green Party on ecological policies. You saw that through the early 2000s with the Tories being split away from UKIP, which caused them to adopt the Brexit position. So I think if you want to at least try and move Labour policy towards the left, if you're outside of a swing constituency, you should vote for further left parties like Greens, like Breakthrough, like Free North Now, etc. So yeah, I would absolutely, again, it depends on what constituency you're in. Obviously, both the US and the UK both use first past the post, and I would advocate, if you're in California for your presidential ticket, vote Green. What if California's not going to turn red because you voted Green. At least put the position in place to show that you don't believe in the duopoly that exists, right? I mean, that's the problem, is that the Lib Dems have changed. The Lib Dems have changed very heavily from what they used to be. I remember being a big fan of the Liberal Democrats in the mid-2000s post-war, because Charles Kennedy was, he was a proper social democrat. He was definitely further left than Blair and Brown. I was vehemently anti-Iraq war. So I absolutely did support the Lib Dems, and because of that earlier interactions that I had with them, that caused me to vote for them in 2010. Well, I shouldn't have done. I lived in Lancaster and Fleetwood at the time, which was a red-blue swing seat, and a bunch of liberal students in the student town all put their votes in for yellow, and all the industrial people voted red, and all the rural people voted blue. and it made the seat go to the Conservatives. I ended up splitting the left vote because I got too entranced by liberal rhetoric on these issues when I should have just held my nose and voted red at the time. Like, the sad part is, I think people who thought that Corbyn made Labour unelectable, like, just as a personality, I think they had a reasonable point. But the problem is these people don't engage enough with political policy making and political action that they think that personality is everything rather than policy. Or they don't look at policy polling and realise what's popular with people. So they think, oh, we have to win from the right. Although you can have someone sensible in charge, right? I don't think that Jeremy Corbyn did himself any favours considering his history he has with Sinn Féin and the IRA and all that kind of stuff, all this kind of anti-British quote-unquote sentiment. We could have had someone, equally a socialist, someone like Clive Lewis or whatever, who doesn't have this kind of sort of baggage, would have been able to do much better because, they wouldn't be able to attack him on that metric. Well, because, a lot of, you can vote for Labour and march with Tommy Robinson on the idea that you don't like, whatever kind of anti-Islam kind of, particular position that Tommy Robinson holds. But a lot of Tommy Robinson's appeal was to a lot of working class people who naturally do vote Labour because Labour at least has their economic material interests at heart, even if they disagree on, immigration policy. Well, yeah. If Starmer made Labour so electable, then why were they fucking languishing in the polls whilst hundreds of thousands of people died? The stats show that the reason why Labour are ahead now isn't because Tory voters are moving to Labour. He's not entranced people over with his superior political ability. They've just disengaged with politics. Like only 9% of those people who said they would no longer vote Conservative after all of the number 10 party shenanigans. Vast majority of the people just disengaged from politics. A very small amount actually moved over to a Labour position. Like his appeal to centrism, it's not making people think that he's a better candidate. All it's doing, by not taking up a staunch opposition to conservative rhetoric and conservative policy, all he's doing is admitting that they're right, rather than creating a counter narrative that moves people over. Yeah, election is absolute bullshit. Like, I hate to say it, but you just got to be able to appeal to people in the correct way. Oh god, the fact that the Lib Dems just could have gone into coalition with Labour at the time. Like, I understand that coalition talks fell through, but at least Lib Dems would have bit the bullet and say, we'll get into government and we'll also get rid of the Tories, right? Keep them out of power. Because the sad part was that Brown lost so many voters because of the financial crisis, which he helped solve. Just because there's a massive financial crisis that depleted a bunch of the reserves, obviously the gold selling off was bad. But with regards to his policies to do with the actual kind of financial downturn, he did pretty well. I mean, democracy is horseshit because it's always beholden to capital interests, like bourgeois democracy at the very least. Because people's viewpoints are kind of skewered by, capitalist narratives that get pushed throughout, the wider cultural hegemon. So it's really difficult to be able to counter capitalist viewpoints because people are so kind of entrenched in liberal viewpoints. Yeah, Nick Clegg. The fact that Nick Clegg changed their platform away from social democracy to centrist liberalism, I can't believe I ever voted for it. No.
Inequality for all. And so if you don't believe that somebody should have inequality based on their gender, their sexual orientation, or their race, or anything like that, that's a moral problem in my eyes.
Because that's a huge thing with the trans and the gay and the LGBTQ and all that whole thing. So I grew up LDS, being Utah County, it's 95% Mormon. At 8 years old is when you get baptized. And so if you're raised around where 95% of people think the exact same way, I feel like that's too young of an age where you're a child and you don't really know what you're doing. And so where I have a problem with the trans or these different things is they're getting kids at 10, 12 years old, and they're pushing them down that path.
Who's they?
Who's they?
Mm-hmm.
This is the bit I saw before. This is so based.
Who's indoctrinating these kids into becoming LGBTQ and etc.?
There's a lot of groups out there.
Like?
I've just heard that there's groups out there. I don't know. You don't think there's groups out there?
I just heard. I heard through the grapevine that they're being transed by people. You name any of these people? No, but I bet they're out there. I wonder where he might have got that opinion from. Is it from a biased conservative news media that was shown that he actually engages with at the start of the show? Strange that. The fact that he just consumes that uncritically without being able to name a single one. God, it reminds me of like the James O'Brien interviews where he talked to Brexiteers and like, what laws do you want to repeal? And they'd be like, I don't know. Like, I just want to repeal them. So they absorb the talking points, but they don't absorb any of the kind of empiricism. True and based.
Does it do that?
No.
I'm assuming you're a straight man, so I think it's weird for you to comment on the queer experience and what that's like for someone growing up who's struggling with those experiences. The way you're describing it as indoctrination, people who are figuring out their sexualities and their queer identities aren't necessarily going to ascribe.
Like, I understand this is edited, but I really hope that Parker have just been like, no, unless you can name one, retract that point. You've heard it, but unless you can name one, then your point means nothing. Like, you should have pushed harder on that. I might have done so, then edited it out, but, you know, wait and see.
To the first labels that are put before them.
If I'm not mistaken, the brain isn't fully developed until you're 25 years old, correct?
Yeah, correct.
So I know how I used to think at 16, man. I know how I used to think at 21, man. I'm not against kids doing whatever they want. It's just the older you get, you change. I got my first tattoo at 15. I'm covered now. If I was a little older, I probably would have waited. When you're young, you're not thinking. And everybody has made a bad choice. And because you're stressed out, you go change your gender. Because you want to
Again, like, no empiricism. Like, do I even need to counter how stupid this point is? Like, does anyone who actually watches my content, both here or on YouTube, like, do any of these people, hey, right, Upset Walrus, how you doing? Do any of these people need me to explain why this person's points are so traumatically stupid? I know, right? I was so poor that I was like, I've got to be a woman now. Like, I certainly agree with the idea that an overall acceptance of trans people makes more people likely to come out or more people like to question their gender identity. But fine, I don't think there's anything bad about that. But also, it's funny, like, he talked about how people have different views as they get older, and how there's this narrative going around that people always get more right-wing as they get older. Which really, people get more right-wing as they get more wealthy, which is what's happened in the UK, where things have become more skewed amongst as house prices have increased, people's asset wealth has increased, especially if they got given houses as part of as the sell-off in right to buy. So their material interests have become more right-leaning over time because they need the house price to increase. That's their main asset wealth, right? Which never used to be the case. But I do find it very amusing that the vast majority of people I see from my generation, again, probably curated by my echo chamber, probably entirely curated by my echo chamber, in that most people grew up at 16 and 21 were all kind of like liberal, like centrist liberals, just slightly left-leaning, maybe like social liberalism is good, let's have better welfare state, etc. And then now we're all communists, right? Yeah, I've got it on 1.25 speed. I watch everything in 2x speed nowadays, and then I get on stream and have to forget to take it from 2x and put it into a different speed, because I just lose attention if it's not quick enough. Well, that's true. Like, people say, well, I'm just going to change my identity now. I'm just going to call myself a woman, and then you just play into it. When they make that joke, I'm now a woman now, so okay, what's your new name? Just be like pretend earnest with them. It's fun. It's true. Like, I made this. I've got a video on my YouTube channel about this. I don't want to kind of bang on because I always gone about right to buy. But if they just replaced the council houses they sold off, it'd been a really great policy. But because they didn't replace it, it was like the worst policy that's ever been done, and basically has contributed to like the destruction of this country.
try something new. Once you do it, you can't go back. The more you throw stuff at kids before they develop, that's indoctrination, because you're trying to get them while they're not fully cognizant to know what's going on.
The older you get, the more conservative you become.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this one.
When I got older and I had kids and I had a family, I actually started reading policies. Everything about me changed when I became a father, because I had a reason to. And I'm sure you would agree with that.
Yeah. As I've gotten older and the environment we're in right now, I feel like they're trying to cancel the Constitution. They're trying to cancel Christianity.
I mean, most teenagers are liberal.
Okay, explain. Please elucidate on that point. But I don't get how people can say, well, I became a parent and then I became, like, more right-leaning politically. That makes, like, zero sense to me. When like, again, I hate to bring this back to Republicans versus Democrats, but who was the party who was like talking about like maternity and paternity leave, like parental leave? Who's the party that talks about who's pro-family with regards to these kind of policies? Like, if you can see that social safety net's being taken away from your children's opportunities, and like certain levels of kind of community interaction that's being taken away due to neoliberal capitalism, I don't know how becoming a parent would make you more right wing. It just blows my mind. Absolutely blows my mind. I mean, I'm happy to cancel the Constitution because I think the Constitution is a bunch of fucking bollocks because I live in a different country and I ground my moral axioms myself rather than letting random old people 300 years ago do it for me.
I was liberal when I was teen. It's fun. Culture is liberal. So and when you're younger, you're going to be a part of culture. When you're older, you're trying to raise your family. You don't have a time to care about what LeBron James said or who did that. Just when you mature, you value what's around you.
My name's Sean. I'm 36 years old, and I'm a conservative parent.
Maybe
My
they
dad's
didn't
kind of
bring up this guy's news sources that he reads at the start. My bad. I apologize for misremembering. Like, that's the problem I have, is that I can have reasonable conversations and just like civil disagreements with someone like Counterpoints, for example. Well, obviously I think he's like terminally online or whatever, but at least his conservative point is towards like civic nationalism and towards he genuinely believes in like capitalism and economic system for its own merits rather than anything else. But he doesn't like he's not engaging with this kind of cultural bollocks that drives me around the fucking bend, which is just it's infuriating. This the entire discourse, left right discourse in both the US and the UK, has been completely engulfed by culture war stuff. Which is why I'm glad that the left were just like, no, let's talk about unions instead. I think you'll find pushing trans and gender onto kids issues onto kids is absolutely fucking based and red pilled. I mean pink pilled more like. But the red pill is being transgender. That's what the Matrix means. I'm just gonna assume that. I don't even know. I should really know about the Matrix. I don't.
my idol. I've seen him basically build a very successful life and seen how simple he's lived his life through prayer.
But you're talking about right-wing radicals, like they're kind of it's kind of an intrinsic personal choice that they've made, right? Like that's not some kind of intrinsic thing that's specific to them. The reason why right-wing people are being radicalized is because capitalism is collapsing in on itself right now. We're seeing all of like the institutions that we know and love being, essentially rotting from the inside as wealth continues to get funneled up towards the same people, reducing the velocity of currency as it exists in the market. These things are all collapsing in on itself, and so it has to take drastic measures have to be taken to keep people not engaged with these failures, right? Again, it's not. Again, as Chud pointed out earlier, that's not something. There's not something they're specifically doing deliberately, but it's just like the incentive structures they're placed within lead them to create these narratives. Like to be able to keep people, especially as people in the UK, for example, when they gain a lot of asset wealth from being homeowners, if they would otherwise disengage from politics, they get kind of as their livelihood gets a little bit more kind of stable as they move out of what would have been a kind of more precarious economic circumstance. So you have to keep these people engaged with politics to be able for them to be consumers of your media. So pushing radical messages like saying, well, critical race theory is destroying our schools. You see, no one ever talked about critical race theory until the right-wing media started pushing it, right? And now it's like the talk of every school board in America is critical race theory, etc., 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 which is obviously a fucking like red herring term that Christopher Rufo specifically tried to make, even admitted on Twitter. Christopher Rufo even admitted on Twitter that he wasn't even doing it out of some specific concern for the legal doctrine of critical race theory, but just wanted to just kind of newspeak all anti-racist advocacy under the CRT umbrella term. In the same way that they like a newspeak woke as being this umbrella term for any kind of progressive messaging. I mean, absolutely, there definitely are plenty of right-wing people that treat everybody with respect. And I think, again, I don't think I'm not going to morally impugn a bunch of right-wing people for absorbing, cultural talking points, because that's not their fault, is it?
And through just basic conservative principles, being raised up LDS or Mormon, I saw a lot of just judgment, and so I don't necessarily believe that you have to be in a religion, but I do.
100% right. This guy is not fucking around. Not fucking around at all. Radical racism therapy? What? What the fuck is that shit? Like, I said this on stream before, and I'll say it again. The most frustrating thing about the critical race theory discourse is that, so it's basically it's a legal theory that points out a bunch of stuff about systemic biases that happen within both in like the legal terminology and in the legal system and in the wider culture overall, and the way in which this is compounded by societal incentive structures, right? From my very, very, very not particularly overarching understanding of it. I'm not going to claim I'm some kind of expert because I'm really not. I'm an absolute layman with regards to critical race theory. But the fact that it is a structural critique in its base, and that's one thing I do know, it's definitely a structural critique. The worst take I hear about CRT is that people think that it makes white people, it tells white people to feel guilty for being white. If it's a systemic critique of structures that are not under your control, it's doing the literal opposite. It's doing the complete opposite thing, where it is saying that, no, any inherent racism that's inherent to society is a fault of incentive structures and long-standing structural racism, and not a moral impugnment of an individual. So it's literally doing the opposite. They're making you feel guilty for being white, rather than saying, now you can be more illuminated on the structural things that are taking place. So you should work to help us work to be able to deconstruct them, rather than feeling like you're morally individually responsible for what's happening. Which is I hate that take. Just going to try and put that out there. Well, true. I think a government should be there to regulate markets, as far as I'm concerned, and also to protect the rights of citizens, the inalienable rights of citizens.
I believe in prayer. I've been all across the board as far as the way my life has gone, and at my happiest times, I've lived by conservative values.
Building off of what you're saying about like teenagers, we're a different generation, and so we view the world differently, and I think that's probably why you've seen more teenagers be liberal, because we just view the world that way, but I don't think it has anything to do with
my generation. I was liberal too when I was a teenager, and all my
Would you like to expand on your idea that Europe is almost full totalitarianism? Are you high? Like, are you genuinely like, are you baked out of your fucking tits with that take?
friends were too. And when you're a teenager, life is fun. It's just totally you kick it, you party. So that's what I'm saying. I get the teenage.
Exactly.
As you grow, you either can run away from responsibility or embrace responsibility. When there's real things going on, you start looking at life a little different. Versus when I was young, I didn't know about that. I didn't know about corporate gains tax, and I didn't know about my stock account, and I didn't know that I can, all these things that I didn't know when I was a kid.
So when people are generally talking about taxing the rich more, they're talking about the top 400 billionaires that are literally paying a lower effective tax rate in taxes than the middle class. The top 400 billionaires paying an effective tax rate of 8%, that's obviously not a fair share. And I think obviously everyone can agree here that they should be paying at least a fair share, right?
How do you increase taxes on someone's assets though? Most of those billionaires aren't.
Unrealized capital gains is how they're specifically trying to do it now, but it would be through long-term capital gains, because a lot of the people who are paying those taxes, they're paying capital gains tax rate. There's also tax loopholes that have been lobbied into.
So fucking based. He knows exactly what's up. I mean, British Empire definitely was built on the back of slavery. That's just true. like not just, I mean, slavery with regards to like in kind of the Western Empire or whatever, and then at least resource extraction of the Third World in in the colonies in the East. Yeah, Parker is super fucking based.
Congress by big corporations and big businesses lobbying politicians to get whatever they want.
So if you get older and you work yourself off, you become a multimillionaire, you deserve to pay more because other people didn't work as hard as you?
But it's not because other people didn't work as hard as me. It's because we, as a society, want to give everyone access to things like basic necessities like healthcare, education, have everyone have an equal opportunity. We don't have that right now.
You can have equal opportunity of a baseline, but the outcome would still be different because every individual is going to work different levels,
Well,
correct?
obviously, yeah.
Right, so I think that's where we are as a society. I was able to pull it off. I graduated high school with a 1.9 G.
Five shit bias creeping again. Global homo is based. Excellent. Let's do it. Let's go ahead. Trans all the kids. Let's go.
GPA, I don't have a college degree, so the only limits are the limits you place on yourself. That's just my perspective.
America is the best country in the world.
I think despite all of our challenges and problems, when you look at all the other countries of the world, Everybody is still trying to come here.
The way I can talk out loud, the way I can feel myself, the way I can express myself fully as an individual. It ain't many places black men can go do that outside of America.
3 years ago, when I got into the court systems and the different rights taken away from me and government control and government power, and so when you have that stuff stripped away from you and you realize most other countries don't have the freedom that America has. America has been the greatest country ever, and I think it will continue because of a lot of good people that stand up for the right things.
See how deliberately vague that was? Well, America is good because we are free and we stand up for the right things. Like, I guess that's your metric, whatever. Well, exactly. Well, like, again, like, what freedoms you do and don't have is always going to be a push and pull, right? Like, Americans don't have the freedom to not die of, cancer and then also go into huge amounts of medical debt, so...
I think I would like to ask the question, what is America the best at?
I think we just was talking about the freedoms that we have here versus what they don't have in other countries.
So what about places in Scandinavia that actually have higher amounts of freedom? They have better democracies than we do here, higher quality of life, higher median income. They have healthcare systems that are more efficient, that take care of everyone in their population, more access to education.
But when you look at the
social mobility, that's the social mobility index, the big key one. When you say, like, because a lot of people, American exceptionists, will say that, well, anybody can make it in America. And I'm like, well, that's literally, if you look at the social mobility index, that's just, like, empirically not the case. It's empirically not the case that anybody can make it in America. It's actually much harder to make it as a nobody in America than it is in, most of the kind of countries in Europe that follow the kind of social democratic consensus, right? Because you don't have access to a bunch of baseline things like education, like higher education or healthcare, etc., etc. Yeah, this kid's really good. You should follow him on TikTok. He's really good. Hey, thanks for the follow, J-Love. But you're absolutely right. There's no specific free speech guarantee in the Scandinavians. But it's like, well, this is not the only metric of freedom, and that's what Parker is elucidating on here. That there are other metrics for which a country can be free, which the America doesn't actually have access to.
big picture, everybody wants to come here. Millions of people are not trying to get into.
I mean, a bunch of people from incredibly poverty-stricken countries that border you want to go there. But, loads of people want to come to the UK. Loads of refugees want to go to Scandinavia or Germany, etc. In fact, some people wanted to go to Germany. They've taken in more immigrant countries than every other European country apart from Turkey, for example. I mean, Sweden specifically, yeah.
Scandinavia.
Why?
Because we have more opportunity than any other place in the world.
We don't even make the top 25 in women equality.
But we have a better opportunity to do something about it compared to other countries. And I would have loved it for Europe.
It's such a nothing phrase. It doesn't mean anything. The guy's just not saying anything that means anything. I mean, there are certain critiques that you could make of first past the post versus some level of proportional representation. I actually really like mixed member parliaments, which happens in New Zealand, which means that when there is such a massive cultural consensus like there was in New Zealand, you can still get majorities. Like the Labour Party actually have a majority in New Zealand right now, which is crazy, considering where they were previously before the previous election. Mixed member is much better, but the problem, the America is just like the worst of both worlds, because first past the post means that you can never have any kind of third-party influence on any kind of electoral cycle or whatever, but also because the Senate, the House, and the presidency are all elected based on different metrics. They're not fairly distributed either. It means that you've always just got this. It doesn't become a check or a balance at any point. All it just becomes at least a stagnation, at least a policy just never getting fucking passed, right? At least at the moment, there's some semblance of normalcy where there's like a close split amongst a uniform Congress, right, where the Democrats are in control of all three branches, but there's at least some level of checks and balance from the more moderate members of the Democratic Party, right, which is better than it usually otherwise would be, unlike under Obama, where the Republicans had the House and nothing ever got passed. But that's a lunatic system. Whoever designed that is an absolute there's a complete moron. At least in the UK. Like, the way in which we scrutinise bills through the House of Lords, which isn't perfect. I do not like the House of Lords as an entity because it's not based on any kind of merit. It's based on, whether you're hereditary or whether you've been given a peerage by a government or whatever. But at least because they are not bowing to the whims of a specific electorate, they tend to deal with things upon principle more often rather than on populism, which leads to at least some level of check and balance in that particular issue, right? Like the way, I mean, UK is definitely not perfect, but the way the US Congress works is just traumatically stupid. It's so bad.
To open their borders the way we have and see if you can get people from other parts of the world to do mass migration to Europe.
I was going to mention Scandinavia.
No, love. Have you considered that Obama may have been not as bad as, I don't know, slavery? Might that have been the worst thing to happen to Black America?
Countries as well, but I think it's also important to address that Scandinavian countries are very like homogenous, like racially, socioeconomically. They don't face the same geographic diversity that we have. What you were mentioning with the fact that we have the opportunity to write with like women inequality, like why is that not?
But everyone makes this argument. Everyone says, oh well, you know, Scandinavian countries are ethnically homogenous, which obviously is a little bit different now in a post-refugee world, right? But also, there are plenty of ethnically non-homogeneous, like heterogeneous, I guess, countries. Like, for example, the UK, which has a similar level of heterogeneity than the US does. Yet we still have universal healthcare. Like, we still have much higher social safety net that you would get in the United States. This isn't something that's intrinsic to ethnically homogeneous states, right? So this argument's nonsensical. I mean, they didn't elect Larry Elder because he's an absolute, like, moron. I mean, so Newsom's garbage as well. I'm fucking leftist. I hate Newsom. But Larry Elder is just stupid. He's just bad. He's just doesn't know anything. He's just an idiot.
Happening. It's because the way our democracy...
Like, just because someone is so stupid that they're popular, that does not translate into political acumen.
is set up. Our Congress is literally in a gridlock right now, as it has been for so many past sessions of Congress. We aren't getting anything productive done.
The opportunity we have here is incredible, and I'm very happy that I live here and not somewhere else, but we are so focused on, oh, America is the best, that we don't look at these other countries and say, why are all those people so happy, and what is that, and how can we incorporate that into our society?
I mean, I'll say, like, I think diversity is good. I think diversity of thought and diversity of opinion is super helpful. It's really easy to get clogged up into this groupthink. So I don't expect anyone else to agree with me or feel the way I feel. I just expect you to respect my right to feel this way. I respect your right to feel this way, and we keep it moving.
100% agree. I couldn't agree more, actually.
Awesome, that's a wrap.
Yeah, Biden was certainly worse than Obama. You're absolutely 100% correct. Like, the crime bill is awful. That's some awful shit. But at least he's trying to make things right. Like, I say trying to make things right, like kind of superficially trying to make things right now. But at least at least the Democrats are at least trying to make things, like, trying to at least have the visage of being, you know, racially conscious. Because people can change. He's definitely not the Biden who wrote the crime bill is definitely not the same Biden that there is now. I mean, Denmark is very racist. So I'm not saying Denmark is perfect, but what I'm specifically talking about here is a socioeconomic structure that they, you know, adhere to, like the social democratic consensus that's been a part of Northern Europe for, you know, decades and decades and decades, which consistently churns out happier people, more equal societies, better levels of social mobility, and, you know, etc., etc. All the good stuff that you just don't get in America. But yeah, I think the left always kind of rolled that one, really. Parker, absolutely fucking based. He did an interview with Vosh, worth watching as well. He's pretty good. So yeah.